I never expected to be here, Clara Bennett whispered to herself as the rain pelted against the apartment windows, turning the city lights into blurry streams of color that reflected off the polished hardwood floors. Her keys rattled in her hand as she fumbled with the lock, heart hammering from a day that had already stretched too long and a commute that had left her soaked through. She had been chasing the wrong apartment number for what felt like 15 minutes, each step echoing down the empty corridor, and now the hallway seemed impossibly narrow, shadows stretching along the walls like silent witnesses. When she finally twisted the door open, a faint creak announced her presence, and she froze. Gideon Black was there, standing taller than she expected, the dim light catching the sharp angles of his face, dark eyes fixing on her with a weight that made her stomach tighten. She held the towel tighter around her shoulders, wishing she could rewind the moment, erase the misstep that had brought her into this collision of worlds. Gideon's gaze didn't waver, aura irradiating quiet control, the kind that made people stop mid-breath. He didn't speak at first, letting the silence stretch long enough for Clara to feel the pulse of the room, the tension wrapping around them like a second skin. Then he moved slightly, a shift in stance that made her pulse skip, yet offered no harm, no immediate threat, only the undeniable presence of power. Clara swallowed, words catching in her throat. I'm so sorry. I thought this was—" her voice trailed off, swallowed by the expanse between them, the soft drip of rain echoing in the bathroom tiles. Gideon's eyes flicked to the towel, then back to her face, and in that frozen instant, 1,000 unspoken rules passed between them, boundaries she hadn't asked to cross in a respect that felt alien yet oddly protective. Her fingers curled around the fabric, and she realized that despite the fear, there was a strange clarity in the moment, a sharp awareness of the man's presence, the careful way he observed, noting every subtle shift in her posture. Outside, the storm continued, a distant siren wailing, a car horn blaring far down the street, but inside, the world had shrunk to this single, fragile space. Gideon took a step closer, not threatening, but deliberate, and Clara could feel the heat of his focus, the way his eyes cataloged every detail, as though he were trying to read the truth from her very bones. She wanted to retreat, yet curiosity pinned her, the inexplicable pull of someone so undeniably dominant, yet silently measured. The bathroom smelled faintly of rain and soap, a mundane scent that clashed with the intensity in the air, highlighting the surreal nature of their encounter. Clara's mind raced, imagining the impossibility of explanation, the absurdity of being caught in a mistake that could have been trivial. Yet here, in Gideon Black's apartment, it became monumental. He tilted his head slightly, the movement almost imperceptible, and said, softly, "Who are you?" The words were simple, but carried the weight of authority, the echo of curiosity, and the potential of danger. Clara's heart leapt, a mix of fear and something else she couldn't name, and she realized that the story had just begun, the first page written in a moment of unintentional trespass, leaving both of them on the edge of a narrative that neither could predict. Clara Bennett took a careful step back, her towel pressed tightly against her chest as the reality of the situation settled in. The apartment was quiet now, save for the soft drip of rain from the windows and the faint hum of the city outside. Gideon Black remained still, every movement deliberate, a shadow of power and authority that filled the space even without words. She tried to focus on the mundane details, the textured tiles under her feet, the slightly fogged mirror, anything to ground herself from the sudden tension that made her chest ache. Her fingers tightened around the fabric, tracing the hem of the towel, mind racing to find a way out of the predicament she had stumbled into. He did not approach, did not demand explanation immediately, yet every instinct told her that the silence was as potent as a command. She felt the weight of his gaze, the unspoken awareness that he could see beyond the surface, that nothing she did escaped notice. Clara swallowed, trying to find her voice. I did not mean to." The words faltered, caught between apology and fear, yet Gideon's lips did not move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, observing, processing, a quiet calculation behind the intensity in his eyes. The room seemed to contract around them, the air thick with anticipation, as though the storm outside had been condensed into a single, fragile moment. Clara's heart beat faster, yet a strange clarity emerged amidst the panic. She could sense not just caution, but the careful restraint in his demeanor, the subtle acknowledgement that while she had crossed a boundary, the situation could still remain under control. She shifted her weight slightly, testing the floorboards with her toes, noting the pattern of shadows cast by the overhead light. Gideon's eyes followed, noting the smallest motions, cataloging gestures, pauses, the tilt of her head. There was precision in the observation, a careful measurement of character and intent without uttering a single command. The silence was profound, yet it carried meaning, each second stretching longer than the last, every heartbeat amplified by awareness and the soft echo of raindrops against glass. Clara felt a mixture of relief and tension, caught between the impulse to flee and a curious, unnameable draw toward the man before her. Gideon shifted again, just enough to indicate presence without intrusion, and the subtle movement conveyed both control and an unspoken permission to remain. Her breathing became more measured, attempts to steady the rapid rise of adrenaline in her chest. Focusing on the texture of the towel, the coolness of the marble, the faint scent of soap lingering in the air. A distant horn honked, another sound from the outside world that felt intrusive against the intimacy of the quiet. Yet even the city beyond seemed muted in comparison to the intensity of the gaze fixed upon her. Clara's mind raced through possibilities, questioning every decision that had led her here, imagining ways the night could unfold, each scenario shaded by the uncertainty and latent command in his presence. Gideon finally spoke, voice low, deliberate, but not harsh. "Stay there." The single word carried weight, authority, and an unexpected thread of protection, urging her to pause, to breathe, to acknowledge that the story unfolding between them was only beginning, each moment a step further into a narrative that neither had anticipated, yet both were now entwined in. Leaving Clara suspended in anticipation of what would come next as the rain continued to patter softly against the windows, and the room held its fragile, charged silence. Clara Bennett's breathing gradually slowed as she stayed frozen in the apartment, every sense heightened, aware of Gideon Black's presence with a precision that seemed almost tangible. The faint hum of the city beyond the windows became a distant murmur as the tension in the room held her attention entirely. Her eyes flicked toward the small details she had not noticed before, the subtle tilt of the mirror reflecting Gideon's stance, the way the light pooled across the countertop, glinting off the chrome fixtures, every surface sharp and real. Gideon did not move abruptly. His steps were measured, controlled, the kind of movement that conveyed dominance without aggression. Clara felt the weight of his observation as though it pressed gently against her shoulders, guiding her posture, dictating the pace of her thoughts. She tried to steady herself, focusing on the rhythm of her own heartbeat, the faint click of the faucet dripping a steady, metronome-like beat that broke the heavy silence. Gideon's gaze remained unwavering, scanning her from head to toe, not with judgment, but with the intensity of someone cataloging every nuance of another person, trying to comprehend the accidental intrusion that had placed her there. Clara's lips parted, seeking words that might explain the impossible circumstance. "I did not mean to," she swallowed hard, her voice trembling despite the attempt at calm, the syllables catching as the quiet magnitude of the room seemed to press on her. Gideon's hand shifted slightly, a subtle motion that seemed to punctuate the pause, and the faint rustle of fabric as she adjusted her towel became amplified in the stillness, drawing attention to the smallest movements. Clara felt a strange mixture of anxiety and clarity, the tension sharpened by his presence, yet tempered by an unspoken restraint that suggested the situation was under his careful control. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on her expression, noting the flicker of hesitation, the momentary tightening of her jaw, the shallow inhale of air as she considered retreat, and despite the vulnerability of her position, she felt a thread of reassurance, a signal that while this encounter was fraught with uncertainty, it was not a threat. The room felt suspended in time, each tick of the clock, each drip of rain, accentuating the meticulous attention Gideon gave to her every motion, and in response, Clara's mind raced to make sense of the encounter, piecing together the context of the apartment, the weathered keys in her hand, the storm outside, and the unexpected convergence of their worlds. Her thoughts slowed as she observed Gideon's subtle shift, a slight movement toward the door without urgency, signaling a recognition of her agency, an unspoken permission to remain where she stood. Clara's pulse began to find a rhythm, matching the measured tempo of his movements, and she realized that the charged silence was a form of communication, a lesson in presence, patience, and observation, where every glance carried meaning, every breath indicated intent. Gideon's voice finally broke the quiet, calm, measured, stay. The single word was heavy with command yet tempered with an unexpected thread of protection, urging her to pause, to remain, to understand that this shared moment was the opening chapter of an encounter that would unfold with each deliberate decision, leaving both Clara and the viewer poised on the edge of what might come next as the storm continued to paint the city in streaks of silver and gray and the apartment held its delicate, tense stillness. Clara Bennett shifted slightly, placing a hand on the cool marble counter to steady herself, every nerve on edge yet strangely attuned to the quiet rhythm Gideon Black had established. The rain continued to hammer against the windows, streaking the cityscape in muted grays and silvers, each drop reflecting the faint glow of distant streetlights. She could feel the tension in the apartment, not a threat, but a presence so absolute it occupied every corner, every shadow, commanding attention without a single overt gesture. Gideon's posture remained measured, deliberate, his dark eyes tracking her subtle movements, noting every hesitation, every breath, and the slight tightening of her fingers around the towel. Clara tried to focus on something mundane to anchor herself, the slight hum of the heating vent, the polished brass handle of the faucet, the faint scent of soap lingering in the air, yet each detail seemed amplified under the weight of his gaze. Her chest rose and fell, attempting to calm the fluttering in her ribcage, and as she did, she became more aware of the delicate balance between fear and fascination that held her rooted to the spot. Gideon shifted slightly, the movement precise, controlled, yet there was no aggression, only the unmistakable presence of someone attuned to the smallest shifts in the space and the person before him. Clara realized she could not simply retreat or hide. The apartment, the storm, and the intensity of his scrutiny had woven a situation that required awareness, poise, and caution. The faint reflection in the mirror caught her eye, showing the way his silhouette stretched across the doorway, the soft edges of the light casting a deliberate highlight on his features, sharp but composed. She swallowed, the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears as she tried to find words, any words, to explain the accidental intrusion. I did not know. The words barely left her lips before Gideon's voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the space, steadying yet filled with unspoken authority. Do not move. The single command carried weight, a gravity that made her pause, framing the room in heightened clarity, forcing her to consider her next move with care. She held her position, recognizing the careful calculation in his stance, the subtle acknowledgement of her presence that suggested both caution and restraint, and a thread of unspoken protection. The storm outside seemed distant now, a backdrop to the palpable focus that had developed in the room, each drop against the window punctuating the suspended tension. Clara's mind raced to process the possibilities, noting that while this encounter was unexpected and disorienting, it carried with it an odd sense of structure and predictability within the uncertainty. She could feel the rhythm of Gideon's presence, measured and intentional, and in response, she adjusted her breathing, letting the initial shock and fear settle into alert attentiveness. The apartment held a stillness that was anything but empty. Every corner, every shadow, every reflection carried meaning, each subtle sound amplified by the quiet weight of attention between them. As she exhaled, she realized that the silent exchange had established a delicate understanding, an unspoken truce that left her poised, aware, and waiting, the story between them unfolding one measured moment at a time, the next movement, next glance, a bridge into a narrative neither had anticipated, but both were now inevitably a part of. Clara Bennett's hands trembled slightly as she let them fall to her sides, trying to steady her thoughts while Gideon Black continued to observe her with a quiet intensity that seemed to fill every inch of the apartment. The soft rhythm of the rain against the windows mirrored the rapid beat of her heart, each drop amplifying the charged stillness that had settled between them. She shifted her weight, noticing the subtle reflections in the polished tiles, the way the dim light highlighted the edges of his features, emphasizing the sharpness of his jaw, the clarity of his eyes, and the calm power in his posture. Every detail seemed to draw her focus, anchoring her amidst the uncertainty, making the apartment both a place of confinement and of strange clarity. Gideon's gaze followed her carefully, tracking the small adjustments in her stance, the way she tilted her head, the tightening of her jaw as she tried to compose herself. Clara's thoughts raced, imagining the impossible explanations, the accidental intrusion that had brought her here, and yet within the chaos of her mind, a strange sense of order emerged from the precise, deliberate calm in his presence. She exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her chest ebb slightly as she realized that while the encounter had begun with fear, it had transformed into a delicate exchange of observation and awareness, each moment weighted with unspoken understanding. The faint hum of the building, the distant sounds of cars passing, the patter of rain, all of it receded into the background, leaving the room suspended in a bubble of heightened consciousness. Gideon shifted his weight subtly, and Clara noticed the way his eyes softened just slightly, acknowledging her composure without lowering the intensity of his attention. She felt a fleeting sense of relief, recognizing that this pause was not a release but a measured assessment, a bridge between caution and connection. Her mind began to parse the implications, noting the careful balance between his control and his restraint, the way the space between them seemed to vibrate with potential, each second pregnant with possibilities. Clara adjusted the towel around her shoulders again, her movements deliberate yet hesitant, aware of the silent communication passing through the room without words, a language of presence, patience, and quiet command. The air was thick with anticipation, each heartbeat echoing the tension that remained unresolved, yet she sensed a thread of guidance, a subtle tether holding her in place, urging attentiveness, reflection, and careful observation. Gideon's voice finally broke the stillness, calm and deliberate. "Do not move until I tell you." The words carried authority and an unexpected element of care, anchoring Clara to the moment while hinting at the unfolding narrative that was only beginning. She nodded imperceptibly, the recognition of the instruction blending with a growing awareness that the story they had stumbled into together would develop with each measured choice, each observed gesture, and that the apartment, the storm outside, and the charged silence between them were now the stage for a shared moment neither could have predicted, but both were compelled to navigate, leaving the next development hanging, a tension that promised more discovery and revelation to come. Clara Bennett's eyes flicked to the door, noting the faint pattern of rain trickling down the window panes, each streak catching the light in a way that made the cityscape outside look like molten silver. The apartment felt simultaneously vast and confining, each corner and shadow imbued with Gideon Black's presence, a subtle authority that defined the space without the need for words. She shifted her weight slightly, feeling the coolness of the marble beneath her bare feet, every movement deliberate, conscious of the measured gaze that followed her, noting the tilt of her head, the soft intake of breath, the tension in her shoulders. Her mind raced through explanations, none adequate, all irrelevant. Yet the rhythm of her heart, the rapid pulse in her chest, forced her to focus on small, grounding details, the gentle hum of the ventilation, the faint scent of soap lingering in the air, the quiet drip of the faucet catching light like tiny stars. Gideon's posture remained composed, every step and breath deliberate, conveying dominance without aggression, control without threat. Clara realized that the initial fear had given way to heightened awareness, each sensation magnified, each shadow loaded with potential, each sound echoing significance. She adjusted the towel around her shoulders again, careful to maintain her balance, noting the subtle reflection in the mirror of his silhouette, the way the light played across the angles of his face, the calm intensity in his eyes. Her lips parted, searching for words, "I did not," and then paused, realizing the futility of explaining the impossibility that had placed her in this moment. Gideon's voice, calm, deliberate, measured, cut through the quiet, do not move. The single word carried authority, a tether to the present, urging her to stillness, to observation, to recognition of the control and restraint that framed the space. Clara breathed slowly, matching the rhythm of his presence, noticing the subtle shifts in the air as he adjusted his stance slightly, the faint rustle of his clothing, the slight movement of his hand, all speaking volumes without sound. The storm outside became a background hum, the city beyond distant and muted, as the room contracted around them, charged with anticipation and subtle communication. Clara's thoughts oscillated between caution and curiosity, the sharp clarity of her surroundings bringing a strange sense of order to the otherwise surreal predicament. She noted the interplay of light and shadow, the precise angles of reflection, the way the space seemed to stretch and shrink in response to attention, and she realized that each second, each glance, each measured breath was part of a silent dialogue. Gideon's dark eyes held hers, steady, commanding, yet tempered with restraint, the presence of a careful protector beneath the authority. Clara felt the fragile thread of trust forming, tenuous but present, connecting them across the tension of the room. Every heartbeat, every exhale, every subtle shift became a part of this charged exchange. The apartment transformed into a space of suspended understanding, each moment laying the groundwork for a narrative that had only just begun, poised between uncertainty and the deliberate cadence of measured interaction, the story unfolding one precise, deliberate movement at a time. Clara Bennett shifted her gaze toward the far corner of the apartment, noticing the small, personal touches that contrasted sharply with Gideon Black's commanding presence. The carefully arranged books on the shelf, the faint aroma of leather from a chair tucked neatly in the corner, the subtle warmth of a lamp casting soft light across the polished floor. Each detail grounded her, offering fragments of normalcy within the charged intensity of the encounter. She felt the rhythm of the space, the cadence of the storm outside, and the controlled, measured steps of Gideon as he moved slowly toward the window, observing the rain as if it mirrored his own thoughts. Clara's mind raced to reconcile the unexpected intrusion into this carefully maintained world, understanding that her presence was both accidental and transformative, a collision of disparate realities. She took a slow breath, letting it out deliberately, focusing on the sounds around her, the soft drip from the sink, the muted hum of the refrigerator, the faint echo of traffic from the street below, small markers of the world beyond the tension-filled apartment. Gideon's dark eyes shifted toward her again, noting the subtle relaxation of her posture, the way her shoulders had eased slightly, and yet the intensity in his gaze remained, measured, precise, an unspoken dialogue that communicated both command and consideration. Clara realized that the silence was not empty. It was loaded with observation, reflection, and the careful negotiation of boundaries that neither had requested, yet both had entered. She adjusted her footing, feeling the slight give of the hardwood under her toes, aware of the fine balance between movement and stillness, recognition and restraint. The storm outside continued to drum its rhythm, but within the apartment, a quieter pulse had taken hold, synchronized to the unspoken understanding developing between them. Clara noted the interplay of light and shadow on Gideon's features, the way his presence dominated without intrusion, and she felt a curious, restrained connection forming, fragile yet unmistakable. Her mind traced possibilities, contemplating how a simple mistake had led to this intricate, charged interaction, where each glance, each measured breath, carried significance beyond the immediate. Gideon's voice broke the ambient rhythm, calm and deliberate. Step aside. The instruction was subtle, authoritative, and protective, guiding her movement without imposing, inviting compliance without fear. Clara obeyed, moving with careful attention, noting the faint echo of each step on the floor, the minor shift of light as she positioned herself as requested, and the way Gideon's posture and gaze adjusted in response. She realized that this moment, layered with tension, observation, and controlled movement, was teaching her an unspoken language of presence and perception, a negotiation of space and awareness, where restraint and authority intertwined seamlessly. The apartment, the storm, and the careful choreography of their interaction framed a narrative that was unfolding slowly yet deliberately. Each action, each pause, each measured glance adding to the suspense, anticipation, and subtle understanding that neither could have predicted, but both were now navigating together, leaving Clara poised on the edge of what would come next, fully immersed in the charged, intricate tension of the room. Clara Bennett felt a shift in the room, subtle yet undeniable, as Gideon Black's gaze followed her every movement, the intensity never wavering, but now carrying a hint of patience, an invitation to understand rather than merely obey. The rain continued to streak the windows, each drop tracing a path that caught the city lights in fractured patterns, casting fleeting reflections across the polished hardwood floors. Clara's breathing was steadying, more deliberate, matching the rhythm of his presence, sensing the unspoken boundaries that had been established and the delicate permission granted to navigate within them. She moved carefully toward the living area, noting the contrast between the stark authority of Gideon's posture and the soft, personal details scattered around the apartment. The carefully aligned books, the framed photographs on the wall, the faint scent of leather from the armchair by the window, all signifying a controlled environment shaped by precision and intent. Her thoughts raced, tracing the improbable chain of events that had brought her into this calculated world. Yet the controlled nature of his presence provided a peculiar sense of stability amid the chaos of her emotions. Gideon's eyes shifted slightly, observing her reaction, the smallest adjustments in posture, the tilt of her head, the subtle change in her expression as she took in the space. Clara realized that the tension was no longer simply fear, but a delicate dance of observation, awareness, and recognition, where each measured movement carried meaning, and each glance communicated volumes beyond words. She let her gaze linger on the details around the room, noting the gentle flicker of the lamp, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the subtle play of shadow across the furniture, all amplified by the charged quiet in the apartment. Gideon finally spoke, his voice calm, deliberate, and carefully modulated. "You are safe here." The words, simple yet weighted, conveyed control, reassurance, and a quiet promise, shifting the atmosphere in a way that made Clara's muscles relax slightly while her mind remained alert, processing the nuances of his intent. She took a slow breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease, yet aware that this was only a temporary reprieve, that the dynamic between them was still defined by observation, authority, and unspoken rules. The storm outside continued unabated, its rhythm a backdrop to the charged stillness inside, punctuating the apartment with the steady pulse of rain and distant city sounds. Clara's attention sharpened, each heartbeat, each step, each subtle gesture laden with awareness as she navigated the space, sensing the unspoken communication threading between them, the measured authority tempered by restraint, and the beginnings of an understanding that required patience, attentiveness, and trust. The apartment, the storm, and the deliberate choreography of presence and movement had created a suspended narrative, a moment where tension, observation, and controlled interaction converged, leaving Clara poised on the threshold of discovery, aware that the next step in their unfolding story would demand both courage and perception, and that the atmosphere of careful control and delicate anticipation would continue to shape every choice, glance, and breath in the moments to come. Clara Bennett felt the weight of the room shift subtly, the rain outside continuing to streak the windows with silver ribbons that mirrored the tension lingering in the apartment. Gideon Black remained in the same measured stance, his eyes following her movements with a quiet authority that was neither intrusive nor demanding, but entirely commanding in its presence. She took a careful step toward the living area, noting how each movement was observed, considered, and cataloged in the silent dialogue unfolding between them. The apartment seemed suspended in a moment outside of time. Every sound, the drip of the faucet, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint echo of traffic below, resonating as if amplified by the charged atmosphere. Clara's mind raced, yet she maintained deliberate control of her posture and gestures, aware that each subtle motion carried meaning, that every breath and glance contributed to the evolving exchange. Gideon's voice broke the stillness, calm, deliberate, and low. "Stay where you are." The instruction was simple yet weighted, carrying the gravity of command and the quiet assurance of safety, threading together authority with an unexpected hint of protection. Clara obeyed, letting her gaze wander around the apartment, noticing the careful order and subtle personal touches. The books aligned with precision, the photographs framed with care, the faint scent of leather from a chair in the corner, all details that conveyed the deliberate control Gideon maintained over his environment. She felt the tension between them shift slightly, the initial shock and fear giving way to heightened awareness, a blend of caution, curiosity, and careful observation. Each subtle movement, every glance exchanged, was a part of a silent negotiation, establishing boundaries and an unspoken understanding of presence and perception. The storm outside remained a distant drumbeat, while the interior space held a delicate, charged calm, a microcosm of control and anticipation. Clara adjusted her towel, mindful of every slight motion, aware of the mirror reflecting the interaction and Gideon's unwavering attention. The room's light played across the surfaces, shadows stretching and shifting with their movements, reinforcing the careful choreography of the encounter. Clara's thoughts traced possibilities, imagining the unfolding narrative that neither had requested, yet both had entered, each second layered with tension, observation, and subtle communication. Gideon's eyes held her steadily, a silent assurance woven into the intensity, a measured invitation to understand the rhythm of the space and the boundaries set within it. Clara exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of attention transform into a strange sense of connection, the awareness of authority tempered by the delicate thread of consideration. Each heartbeat, each breath, and each measured glance added depth to the suspended story, leaving Clara poised on the edge of discovery, knowing that the next step, the next decision, and the next glance would continue to shape the narrative between them. The storm outside painting the city in streaks of silver as the apartment held its quiet, charged anticipation. The air between them thick with potential and the promise of what was yet to come.